Ladies and gentle dudes, what's going on? Thank you for coming back for another weekly episode of SpyCam, where we take a look at a glimpse inside the esports industry. As you've seen from previous guests, if you've joined us before, we try to invite on some of the leading personalities and folks behind the esports industry, so you can see a little bit behind what it takes to get to where they are, a glimpse of what their specific role in the industry looks like, and how maybe if you're looking to do that someday, how you might get there. Today I'm joined by none other than Jeff iNcontrol Robinson, a mainstay in the scene for a long time. Many of you may know him. He is with Evil Geniuses. At this point, a gaming personality is the title we'll use, but of course Jeff has done a little bit of everything over the years, commentating, playing professionally. We've seen a lot of him throughout esports, even back when I was a fan long before I worked in the industry. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I always make the assumption there's at least one person on our channel who's never heard of you before, has no clue who you are. Would you mind? Oh, I actually didn't turn the music off. Let me do that real quick here. My apologies. Would you mind taking just a minute or two to talk a little bit about what got you into esports, and obviously your path to today, because you didn't start out as a big-time personality hosting things like IEM and that nature, right?
No, of course not. I think one of the kind of common threads you'll find with a lot of people of certainly my era, but I think just it even transcends my era. I think a lot of people in esports didn't necessarily seek out a profession there or go there. I was a 12-year-old boy that had a PC Gamer magazine, saw an Ultralisk. It looked vaguely like a Carnifex, and I thought to myself, that looks amazing. For this game coming out called StarCraft, which is basically like the space sequel to Warcraft 2. Or not sequel per se, but like
The next step.
edition. Yeah. So I just started playing, and I just really, really liked it. And the combination of competition, but also infinite skill ceiling. Like, there's just, no matter how good you are, there's someone better than you. And if you are somewhere near the top of your area or team or whatever, you'll quickly be taken over. Like, it was just a constant, never-ending cycle of really fun strategy and competition, which is a perfect storm for my addiction. So 18 years later, here I am. I just kept playing and eventually got pretty good to the point where I was traveling to tournaments and having to explain to my parents, yes, I am playing a video game in Florida, things like that. And lo and behold, Evil Geniuses kind of brought me on, and the rest is history, as they say. That was the professional beginning, and now my wife works for Twitch. I host, cast, play, and do video games for a living. I call myself a personality because what else do you call someone that does all those things?
Yeah, you don't really fit in a box per se, right?
Not really.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating in esports in general, and this is kind of where we're in our not quite mature phase, where if you look at traditional entertainment, theater, film, television, whatever, everyone fits in a box, right? My job is I'm production manager, or I'm the actor, or whatever, but it reminds me a bit of when you're in college for theater, because that's what I went to school for, where you've got to do 19 different things. That's kind of how the industry works. You can't just go, oh, well, only thing I do is this, because it doesn't work, right?
Right.
I mean, there are some select few that does work for, and certainly that obviously was an option for you because you were playing at the highest level. You were playing for one of the biggest teams. Can you talk a little bit about why the transition? Was it something you chose to do? Did it just fall upon you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it was certainly something that caught me a little bit by surprise. Evil Geniuses kind of ascended as a team and organization alongside. I mean, they definitely predated StarCraft 2, but I think the big explosion for them in terms of sponsorship and success was with StarCraft 2, like a lot of things. And at that time, of course, sponsors are going to need content. They're going to want certain things, and that puts the stress on the players to provide said content while also competing at the highest level. And for a lot of my team, that was something they were very aggressively not interested in because they were pro gamers first, not content producers.
Right.
Myself, I really enjoy content. I like speaking in front of audiences. I like performing. So I kind of gladly took on a lot of that work. And as such, it kind of cut into my practice time. It divided my focus. So my results, obviously I can't solely blame this, but certainly it did contribute. My results started to dip, and my presence and success, I would say, as a content producer started to rise, and it kind of just became a natural transition where it's like, okay, look, I am getting older. I have played this for a long time. I really do enjoy making content, but making content and focusing on that pretty much on any level, traveling for events as a commentator as opposed to a player,
Right.
spending time doing those things is going to make you a worse player. So there just was a come to Jesus talk basically with the organization where they were like, hey, you're welcome to still play, but that's not going to be what we pay you the big bucks for.
Right, right. And it's interesting hearing you say that about it being a natural progression rather than a. You hear a lot of people today say, "I really want to be a commentator," or "I really want to be a player." It's a very clear like that's the thing I want to do, right? And yours was a little more. The opportunity presented itself, and so you kind of grasped onto that. It sounds like.
And I think that's again a common thread throughout all of esports. A lot of people that weren't necessarily seeking out where they ended up in gaming. They just were really interested. Usually, passionate is the word that kind of gets thrown around, sometimes even in a negative way, but it very much so is the driving factor. And then they end up in the right place at the right time, and that's I put in a lot of work, a lot of time, so I think that kind of put more bullets in the chamber, so to speak, for that right place, right time. But yeah, I was definitely not seeking this out, and it just happened. I think you're gonna hear that from a lot of people.
I mean, even myself, I can kind of back that up. When I looked just 2 years ago, when I got in esports about 2.5, 3 years ago, and I was a
Mhm.
tournament organizer. It was an obvious progression for me because I worked in theater for 10 years. Putting up a production is no different than putting up a tournament, right? Same basic progress. So I was putting up World of Warcraft tournaments, I was putting up Hearthstone tournaments, and when I left the organization I was working with at that time, I thought I was actually, esports was fun, but that people say, oh, I got to go do this other job to make my career. I've got 3 kids, etc. And I find myself back here 3 years later running an organization, and I'm a team owner. And even we started Splyce, team ownership wasn't even on the horizon. It wasn't even a
Mm.
possibility, right? It just happened, is the best way to put it. So I think that's a really good point. And I always like to say, even if we were talking esports, opportunity presents itself and you have the choice to take it or not, but you don't get to pick when opportunity comes. You can set yourself up for it, like you said, like with really hard work and effort, and set yourself up
Sure.
for it, but you can't pick when it comes. It's up to you whether you take it or not.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So we're progressing along. Obviously, you've taken a step back. You're not playing as much. We Anybody that follows you know you do play like in your competitive tabletop and stuff like that still. How do you balance that with such an incredibly diverse schedule? I mean, I'll see that you're hosting IEM and then you're traveling over to Cologne and you're doing things like TwitchCon. I mean, you really have an enormous travel schedule, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, it sometimes is a bit overwhelming because I'm also a bit of a homebody guy. Like I really enjoy the comfort and the rest that home brings.
Play
But
a little bit of video games on your own terms.
oh yeah, but more often than not, out of a month I'll spend 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weekends abroad. If not international, then certainly out of state.
Right. And so that's gotta, I guess, because this goes back to the idea of picking one thing versus being broad. That I assume that there are things you just miss because of that, right? Like you just can't play in this tournament, or you've got to focus more on one thing or the other. Like I'm talking like you do tabletop and stuff like that still.
Yeah, I think for me it works out really nicely just because I'm not entirely sure how to where to place the blame, but I'm very good at compartmentalizing in my mind. Like if I just can't do something, it doesn't really bother me, which is nice because I know there's a lot of people. My wife is one of them, very close to me, who's like, if she can't do something but wants to, that really bothers her. But for me, if it's just a fact of life, it's pretty okay. So when it comes to balancing schedule, like it's pretty easy for me actually. I would say that part of the life is easy. I look at a weekend and go, okay, that's open. I can do it. Now I can't. The times where it does suck is because a lot of gaming events aren't announced to us, and I'm sure this will become better over time. But I still get messages from my friends at DreamHack or IEM, and they're like, "Hey, in 3 weeks, would you like to be in Poland?" And it's like, it's at that point in life where I've got dogs, a wife, and other jobs and other gigs, and I'm just kind of like, yes, I can. Or there's just times where I'm like, no, I can't. But if you would have told me like 2 months ago, yeah, I could.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this kind of transition we're in because even just in the couple years, I've obviously not been in near as long as you have, but I've seen this transition from the chaoticness, we'll say, right, of,
Mm.
oh, we're having an event in 4 days, who can we get here, to the really kind of more structured approach to the events where things are getting on the calendar earlier. They're doing things like covering travel and arranging it even for you a lot of times. Just a couple of years ago, you were having to kind of wing it a lot of times to make it to the events that mattered. I don't know if you were experiencing that as well, but I've seen a lot of people, at least down there in the last couple of years, till now we're getting to the state where people on the top end can really rely upon more of a steady schedule, more support from organizers, etc.
Well, it's night and day. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Dan Simkowski and Nick Tasteless Ply, like the Tastosis, the big StarCraft 2 commentators.
Right.
Their career was jump started from literally buying their own tickets and sending themselves to Korea without a job, without a visa, without real connections. They, vaguely knew people. They just wanted to do StarCraft, and Dan and Nick both slept on floors, lived with 5 or 6 roommates in a sweaty Seoul Korean, basement apartment.
Yep.
And that is obviously the most extreme example. But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff you're talking about, it wasn't too long ago where it wasn't embarrassing for a gig or tournament or something to be like, hey, we'll pay you, of course, and we'll get you a hotel, but do you mind sending yourself here? And for me personally, I've been very lucky to always be in a position to say no to that kind of thing because I always, if I was being paid to do something, I consider it part of my profession. So I brought the professional standard with it, and that's so far to now, it's been great. It's fine.
And of course, we talk no different than when we were talking to people who are. We talked to VLPS a couple weeks ago, who's a professional Hearthstone player for Splyce. There's a very distinct difference there in that you're like part of that 0.001%, right? Where if you look at people on the rise, I'll use him as an example where he's not at that pinnacle yet. He'll get 1 out of 7 of those invites instead of 1 out of 1, and have to find ways to get to the other 6. And he's on a team so we support him there, but not everyone is, right? There's plenty of
Right.
people out there going. I think Tastosta's story is perfect for this example. I've watched players, commentators, people who basically want to make it go. I'm going to pick up. I'm going to save up. My best example right now is a guy named EEVSU, Smash 4 commentator. We started supporting EE a while back, but ultimately he's a commentator. So commentating is not a business where you get to wear jerseys, so you can get on a team and get all that kind of support. So he's really got to figure it out on his own a little bit, right? If you're a player, you just get really good. Hopefully you get on a team and it works out. And EE will literally go, okay, I have these 5 events in the next 3 months I want to go to. This is how much it's going to cost. I'm going to work to earn that money so I can go to those events. And you've seen his
Sure.
growth. He's starting to get invited to things. They're starting to pay for travel maybe because they really want him there. And that's hard work that gets you there. It's not necessarily, I mean, he's talented, right? But that's talented by yourself does nothing, right?
That is the more common story, at least in my experience, for people that end up in a career in esports than the alternative, which is, I believe, I've spoken to just countless people very briefly who are just like, "Hey, I love gaming. This is what I want to do. Point me in the right direction. What do I do?" And I think the inherent expectation is that it is a developed and secure industry because that's kind of the way it looks looking in. Like shows look professional. There's
Yep.
all these teams, sponsorships. There's money. So it's just like, well, of course. Where do I apply? I mean, this is amazing. But it's so not the story. It's so many people like knock on that door and say, "Hey, I want to be a part of this," and the answer they get is, "Great. You can do some free writing for our website. You can be a online manager of this guy's Twitch. Like, we need these things." And they're like, "Okay, what's it pay?" And they're like, "Absolutely nothing." What a silly question. And they're like, "Well, I mean, I need to make a living." And they're like, "Okay, next person." And it's
Yeah.
because gaming is still in that situation where every single dollar, especially the higher up you go, wants to get reinvested back into it because it's not a bajillion-dollar industry at the level of team ownership or website management. Like there are definitely success stories, and it is a profitable venture, but it takes time, and it takes more often than not investing, and not investing in the common sense where it's like, okay, I take $10,000 and I turn it into life work. No, it's time, money, and you better be earning money elsewhere because you're not going to get paid for this for a while. And for a lot of people too, by the way, well, actually, let's just come out and say it. There's actually zero guarantees. In fact, the numbers are against you. You could put in a year's
Yeah.
worth of free labor or close to it, and it could literally just not pan out. In fact, it probably will not pan out. And that sounds really bleak and depressing. I there was definitely a time where I'd be like, shoot for the stars, do your dreams, just be you. And it's like if you want to hear that, there's plenty of people that'll tell you that. In my experience, I'm not saying don't try for it. But I am preparing you for the harsh Serbian winter that is esports. Like there are some people that just stepped into it, right place, right time, and then all of a sudden they're there. But for most people, I was working a job, and at night I was staying up till 3 a.m. writing, managing, and knocking on doors and embarrassing myself a lot of times. You got to ask the uncomfortable question. You got to be
Yep.
like, hey, I'd like to work for you. And they're like, no, we don't want you. You're like, no, please give me a chance. I
Yeah.
really want it. Like you have to be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and humble,
And
and
willing
that's
to
how it
ask
is.
questions that no one, like my favorite one is when I got Thorin to write for us. He was our first writer. People go,
Yeah,
"Whoa, how'd you get Thorin? You guys are nobody." I'm like, "I know," and I literally just Facebook messaged him, and he took the time to respond. Most people he doesn't respond to. Like that would never happen if I didn't put some effort and be willing to be
well, put
ridiculed.
yourself in the line. Like yeah, exactly, like you're saying. If you're just like, oh, Thorne would never write for us, I'll never ask him. Then that opportunity's gone, and you didn't even know it.
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, as you said, they're probably and maybe Thorne can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing there's plenty of people that said, hey, Thorne, we'd love you to write for us, and he said no. He said no, thanks.
Or
He
doesn't
said, what do you
respond.
want?
He's just too busy, you
Right.
know? Yeah, you're totally right, and I mean, we have that. We're not that big yet. We're not anywhere near that kind of size at Splyce, and even us will get emails, and I'm just like, I can't respond to this. It's not of interest to us. I'd like to just write back and explain why. I can't spend the 10 minutes.
Right.
I have employees of my company who say to me, "Can I get a meeting with you?" And I'm like, I honestly don't have time for the next 3 or 4 days.
Yep.
That's how crazy my schedule is. So I'm like, I can't spend 10 minutes with someone on the side. So, I'll use one, Jeff. It's interesting hearing your perspective on that because I think there's a lot of people out there that try to give this idea that in esports you should never do anything for free. Everything you do is worth money. And I come from theater, and theater is the most grindy business out there. And theater is,
Yeah.
centuries older than esports. And to this day, it's still expected you will show up and you will do oodles and oodles of effort that may amount to nothing, and you will still do it if you want to be successful, unless you're that rare flower who happens to just be right place, right time. And I know
Right.
very, very few of those people after 10 years in that industry. I think people think esports is film when esports is theater right now. In 10 years, we'll be film, right? Where when you roll in, there's a set job and a career path and those type of things. It's still select people, but it's much more structured and organized. In theater, everyone sees there's Broadway and there's West End, which are legit money and legit enterprises, but 98% of theater makes no money, right? There's no you're struggling, you do tons of stuff for free because you have to do it. In your blood, you're just like, this is what I need to do. And
Sure.
to kind of expound upon what you said with this idea of you may not get anything out of it, I would even go so far as to say if you don't need to be in esports, like if it isn't something you like passionately want to do, it's probably the wrong career for you because 10 other people are going to work harder than you are, and then they're going to get that spot over you because they do need to do it. Would you kind of agree with that?
I do. I think what's interesting though, and I find I tend to overthink things as opposed to underthink things. But for me, I absolutely agree with you. But what's so interesting, and so I don't know. For me, I look at it as a form of competition, so I actually quite enjoy it. But I could see it being very intimidating and scary for other people. You're absolutely correct, and you heard me rant and rave talking about how you should be. There's all these stories about people working for a year for free or for little to no money to only then carve out something, but on the lower percentile. I will say this: gaming, because it is a bit of the Wild West, because it is still kind of professionalizing and forming up and coming to age, so to speak. It definitely was like an infancy of a market, and now it's becoming something much more stable and much more reliable. And with those standards comes the higher quality of life, if you will. If someone thinks they can get you for free, if someone thinks they can pay you less, they will. Because again, there's not just bajillions of dollars fluttering from the sky in esports. It's all like any flux of money that comes in, all of a sudden that's being pushed back into reinvesting. Who can we pay to get this show bigger? Who can we, what player can we sign so our team has more grab, has more success?
Right.
And that's just on those levels. The examples are infinite, but the point is, you have to also be predatory in your self reliance as well, and that is such a scary thing because there's a value to you that you may not be willing to admit, but if you're like, no, actually, I would like to be paid for this, and this is something I want to fight for, there's a very good chance, in fact, again, a higher percentage chance than not, that they look you in the eye and say, well, there's 10 people behind you that'll do this for free, goodbye.
Right.
But you have to like self-evaluate. You have to fight to know when that point in time is that you're like, okay, I can push this. Otherwise, you're ejected, and that's just one opportunity that who knows how much time and energy you invest into.
You know what I think of it though? I had an old boss. I worked in manufacturing for 5 years after I was out of theater, and my boss was the VP of HR, and he'd been doing this forever. I mean, this guy was in his 60s. He'd been in HR since his mid 20s, and I remember sitting down with him one time. It was probably about a year after I'd gotten there, and so I was established. But you know, in this day and age, people don't work 40 year manufacturing careers. You stay for a few years, you go to the next one. And he said to me, you know, at some point you're going to leave. I was like, whoa, I was totally taken aback by that, right? And he goes, no, it's just like, look, I've been in this a long time. I get it. You're going to leave at some point. And the goal is to make sure you got enough out of this place and we got enough out of you that we leave on good terms, right? That you left a better employee, we left a better company. And so that's what I expect. I mean, maybe you'll last 3 years, 2 years, whatever. But ultimately, that was his expectation. And so a little bit of that, I think, bled into me in the way I kind of run this company, and I think is really kind of quintessential what you're saying about how you expect of yourself. So if you take that no-pay job, right? And say you set yourself, I'm going to do this for 3 months and see what I can do out of it. Let me set some personal goals. Here's what I think I can accomplish. Let me set some goals of what I think I should be able to accomplish for them. Can I drive readership for them? Can I create great videos for them? Whatever those things are. And then see if you meet those. And no matter what, at the end, you're going to have walked out with some sort of value for whatever that next venture is. Is it the perfect setup? Probably not, because the perfect setup is what a lot of established industries have, where you have internship, then into a lower paying starter career, and you work your way through. We don't quite have that, but I can say that we've picked up people who've done those kind of things where, hey, I did a community management job for no money here, then over here I was doing some video content paid on like a small stipend per month, and before you know it, they're working for a salary, you know? So that shows kind of that progression.
Oh, it's there. I 100% agree with you. It's interesting because I feel like a lot of the industry-wide stories and expectations you can get from esports right now, you'd have to go back to. I mean, there's all kinds of growing, like Silicon Valley, Industrial Revolution. Like those are extreme examples, and obviously on a much wider scale and bigger impact. But it's interesting. Like there's people talking about unions, and that's something that's starting to come into shape. And it's got a natural lifespan that everyone like in the other formative stages of other industries have experienced, but here we are in the gaming world, like the professional gaming world, where we're experiencing the same things. It's cool.
Yeah, and I always use the phrase when I'm talking to anyone in the kind of the business world outside of esports, when they'll ask about something normal when you talk to a company. And by normal, I mean compared to like any industry that's growing. And I say, we do in 1 month what most industries do in 5 years with progression. And that's, I think, something people miss in esports is we're moving so fast right now that the Wild West analogy, I think, is really great because there's this big open frontier in front of us. There's a million opportunities, but we're moving along at rocket speed, like on the railroad across the West. And knowing when to jump off at the right place, where to settle, that's a tricky thing. There's a lot of opportunities, but you may build Vegas, and you may build that watering hole with no water in the middle of Arizona too, and you don't know at this point, right?
There's luck involved for damn sure. I mean, there's any success story is paved to over the corpses of countless attempts to do the same or similar things that fail.
Yep.
For reasons that are either stark and true or obscure, like they just happened.
Yeah, I mean, even just the fantasy industry, because that's probably the biggest up-and-comer in esports right now. We've already had our first victim. Vulcan closed their doors, right, on fantasy. That took less than a year. So that's always.
Oh, I didn't know that. Did they end up doing that?
Yeah, about a month ago. They closed. They still have their skin sites, but they've closed their fantasy, and they got a big investment.
Yeah.
It was like $10 million or something like that. It wasn't little money. And there'll always be people, either whether it was wrong time, wrong place, wrong people, wrong decisions, we won't know. But the point is that you're right, there will always be those kind of corpses along the way, and maybe someone will make it out the other end and become the juggernaut, right?
That's the hope. It's interesting you bring up Vulcan too, though. That I feel like highlights something that I'm not experienced enough in other markets to talk about this being unique to esports, but certainly something that really fascinates me is that because of the momentum and shift in media away from traditional television broadcasts, where it's like, if you want to be big time, you're on the television. Well, that's not necessarily the selling point at this point in time. Like, people are
Right.
starting to recognize newspapers are starting to kind of go away. TV subscriptions and media is actually starting to diminish. Where are all these people going? They're online. They're watching streams. They're watching content there.
Jeff,
So,
I got a thing in the mail yesterday. Literally, this
yeah,
is so relevant. My cable company offered me Showtime, HBO, and every cable channel for $30.
$30.
That's a $120 package 6 months
Oh yeah.
ago. That tells you something right there. They're desperate, right?
Oh, it's huge. ESPN is because I guess the way it works with media is when you sign up for cable, based on who brings in more value has the higher percentage of that money from that package, and ESPN is God in that realm. Something like in the last year, and pulling the number out of my butt, but it was tens of millions of dollars less in subscriptions from ESPN,
Yep,
and
I
that's
saw
why a
that.
lot of the content's shifting that way. But my point is, because of these numbers flying around, and because these companies know this is happening, they are getting meetings, they're being emailed, they're sitting down with people who are saying, "Look, I am a gaming I'm really smart. I know gaming. I'm a professional gaming guy. If you give me, I don't know, let's just say $5 million, which is 10%, it's 3% of your advertising budget for the next year. I will give you hundreds of millions of views." And those media companies and those investors are like, "This is fantastic, absolutely amazing. Of course. How about we make it 10 million, and in 1 year's time you revolutionize our company?" And those people are like, "Sure, well, of course do that." That's happening a lot in gaming. Obviously, the numbers, again, picking them out of my butt, but people sitting in front of people that are uneducated but have tens of millions of dollars, because that's the standard in media, are giving them this money. And then we go back to that kind of Siberian winter I was talking about with esports, where it's like, you can't take any large sum of money and in 1 year turn a profit, especially not a significant profit.
God, no.
Esports in particular is a bloody grind. Like, big money means that you have more money to buy up food and wood and survive that winter, and hopefully turn out a bigger result later. But it's just the reason I'm telling the story is there's just so many companies, not necessarily Vulcan, by the way, but I actually wouldn't feel too bad leveling some of this criticism potentially in that direction, of people that got really excited about something, got gigantic amounts of money for it, and then as the industry started to kind of level out and started to kind of not finalize, it's the wrong word, but standardize,
Hmm.
those people are right spot in the deadlight, and they're like, "Oh, actually, we don't have that answer," and then boop, they're gone. That's just how it
Yeah,
happens.
there's I was talking to some people recently who said these are very smart people who are looking at the industry and said this, and I hadn't thought of it till they said it, and as soon as they did, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. That there's a lot of people right now watching the industry, waiting to see where it's going to settle out in the next 6 months to a year, because we had a whole bunch of action, right? Things went crazy. We had Rick Fox, we had Mark Cuban, we had Ashton Kutcher, all these big time names, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Sacramento Kings. Like, whoa, listen to all that cool stuff. Linkin Park, a freaking all time great band for those type of. I mean, not saying quality music, don't get me wrong, but all
Hey
time.
man, we've all been there.
I
We've
know,
all been
I love Linkin Park, but people will I'll get some chat hate right there, I'm sure. Um, but anyway, but all that happens, right?
there.
That something has to come out the other end, right? So you're gonna wait and see. Do more Vulcans happen? Do more things fall apart,
Oh, they will.
or do more alpha drafts happen where they get acquired by FanDuel, right? And if the rulings I don't know any legal stuff, so keep in
I
mind that.
got you.
But if all that stuff hadn't happened in Nevada and New York, etc., would alpha draft be this booming thing right now? We'd be looking and going, "Whoa, look at that success story. Those guys are only a couple years old. They did it the right way. They got there. We don't know, right? Because from what I see from the outside, it looks like right now it's a struggle, right? We all know that from Alpha Draft and DraftKings, etc. All those guys, like they're in a tough time. So that's probably not the perfect market to look at, but it does if you're an outside business person and you're looking at esports, whether from an investment perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, or from a marketing perspective. There is a little bit of that, right? Like whose basket do I want to throw my eggs in?
Right.
That's important right now.
I know, and it's interesting because, like you said, there's people watching and waiting, and that's like the safer bet. But because of the encouragement to get involved in gaming and this new age media, so to speak, You know, the early bird catches the worm as well. Like there's a lot of people
Yeah.
that are like, we're gonna fire a bullet here. It's risky. We don't know where we're going, but this guy in a suit who's apparently been in gaming for 10 years says that it's a safe bet, so we're gonna do it. And I'm not gonna name names, but there's just a lot of stories of that kind of stuff, and it's people being misled. Like I just had a phone call about a month ago from a couple of big poker partners that were like, "Hey, we just really want to host a gaming tournament." And I was like, "Okay, what are you talking about?" They're like, "Oh, we just want to host a gaming tournament. Like if we can just fill up a stadium and sell a couple of $100 tickets, something like that." I was like, it was like so out of place and so
Yep.
incredibly naive that this was that moment in time where I could be that shadow figure in a back room and be like, "Yes, let's host a League of Legends amateur tournament, and you guys,
Gaming paradise is all I can think right now.
yeah, my fee to help you organize this is a cool $20,000. But what's that? You're gonna make 150. You're gonna make 250. No, I told them. I basically, unfortunately, I shattered their dreams. Like they were really doe-eyed and excited about it, and I was just like, no, that's not how it works at all. No,
Yep.
people won't pay that ticket. Your viewership's gonna be competing with professionally ran tournaments that have been earning viewership for years now. Like,
Yep.
so they're not doing it, and that's going to happen more often than not. They're going to talk to, well, no, the opposite. Excuse me. They're going to talk to someone. They're going to say, "Sure, let's do it," and that person's going to do a quick cash and grab where they're like, "Hey, I tried." And they're not going to like leave them in a desert. They're going to try. They're going to do what they can, but they're going to go for the quick money because it's funny. It's a little bit cyclical. They're not evil people that are making bajillions of dollars off of conning people in esports. They too are passionate gaming people that truly believe that they can help put something on and want to, but also need money because they've given up so much for this moment in time and are
Yep.
finally looking at a payday. So I'm not talking about evil people lurking around stealing money. I'm talking about desperate people who want to make a living out of gaming, think they have the answers, and help people shoot themselves in the head, essentially.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of those best intentions end up that way, right? So,
Yeah.
I actually had a similar conversation with someone recently. I was a little different. It didn't end in a no, but what the conversation was, I said to them, if you're going to do an event, expect that whatever you budget, you will get nothing back the first go around. So, if you decide you're going to do a $50,000 tournament, then you're throwing away 50 grand, and that's okay to do. It's a great way to start. And then when that's done, you figure out how much you made from it, and then you gauge how you're doing your next event. And obviously, you can expect to make a little more in the next event if you do things right, you learn from it, etc. But maybe you come back and you make 5,000, right? Maybe that's it.
Yep.
And I said that's okay. That's called investment. And if you have the right people who are tackling it for the right reasons and not doing the quick buck on even the other side, because it sounds like even the people you're talking about, they're going, let's take advantage of this wave, make some good money quick, right?
Right.
Then they'll be willing to go, well, yeah, if we're going to do this, we're in it for the fact that this could be the NFL in 5 years, and we all want a piece of the NFL, right? They're not doing it to try and make money in the first tournament.
Right.
And I've seen that very distinct difference when you talk to the two different type of people. The people that go, esports is going to be the juggernaut. Facebook, because I think we talk to Facebook, and they go, esports is important. We're going to have our sports team tackle Facebook, not just some side people, the same guys that deal with the NFL, the NBA, major soccer, etc.
Sure.
Versus another company that goes, okay, what can I make in esports in 6 months? And
Yep.
I think that is something that we don't talk about at all, and it's definitely happening out there. Gaming Paradise is not going to be the last one, right?
No, and it wasn't the first one.
Oh God, no. Just the most recent times with some fantastical, terrible stories to talk about, right? Passports being taken by authorities. If you guys in chat haven't heard this story, I would recommend you look it up, and you'll see some stories of professional players having their passports taken away by police, unable to leave the country, prizes never paid out, a stadium that they assumed they were going to fill to pay tickets that came nowhere near to sales, Dota teams eventually just saying we're not going to go. Like they canceled the Dota tournament altogether. There's a great piece by Beef from Complexity, the manager, that wrote up about his experience working on it. So
Yep.
that being that was 9 months ago, you'd think that was ancient history, but it's really not. It's really not.
Nope.
Shifting gears a little bit, I'm going to grab a chat question here because I think it's a really interesting, fun one. Jeff, if you could be a top 5 StarCraft player right now, would you trade it for what you have do right now?
So it's an interesting question because it's obviously rooted in fiction and it's hypothetical. If I could, So, again, overthinking things. That's who I am. That's what you get. You get long-winded answers and overthinking things.
Love it.
I can't take the question serious because in order to be a top five player, you have to be able to dedicate all of your time and energy into it. And I'm gonna come out and say this. I haven't seen anyone. I was one of the first to originate this theory, which is a stupid thing for any human to say ever. There's no original ideas or thoughts. But anyways, I believe in order to be a top professional competitor in a very well, most of our esports are basically. In fact, I would just say, for the most part, the ones we recognize as esports are the top echelon games that are very difficult to play. Obviously, that's why they're competitive. In order to be a top-notch StarCraft player, you have to be, for the most part, young, unconcerned with things like taxes and a wife and a house. You need to not have obligations to the government sponsors. Like you have to basically sit at home and have a clear mind while you play this extremely difficult game. That is not me. I have a wife. I'm gonna hop on a plane to go do this gig. I gotta talk to my team about that. I'm working with Twitch on this. I'm doing that activation. I need to spruce up my stream, etc., etc. Nothing, that people don't know about. But the point is, my life is no longer, oh wow, this map, the meta right now has it in this way. Tomorrow I need to crank out games and secure someone for 5 hours where we're just going to play games nonstop, working on that. I think the spirit of what the question was asked. So that's the lame ass answer.
At least you're aware of it.
Yeah. The spirit of what he's asking is, do you enjoy what you're doing now, or would you exchange it to be a top-notch competitor? I was never a top-notch StarCraft 2 player. In Brood War, I legitimately was one of the best in America, and I really enjoyed that. There's a huge part of me that needs to be in competition and needs to be not just. I'm not a kind of guy that's like, I just want to play. It's way more fun when it's against somebody else. No, I need to be one of the best. That's what I want at all times. So for me right now, I have Warhammer, where it hits on all the chords with StarCraft. I enjoy it. I think it's an amazing game. It's complex. As good as I could ever be. I'll never be the best. I'll never be. There's no ceiling. It's the same stuff as StarCraft for me. If I didn't have that, the answer is yes. I would want to be a top-notch StarCraft competitor.
Wow.
Because I need that. I would not be a human. I would not be a happy, functional human being without it. I enjoy content. I really enjoy performing. I love telling jokes on a stream and getting, Rotterdam to laugh himself sick. But if I didn't have competition in my life, I wouldn't be happy. Because I do have competition in my life, and because, like I said earlier, the lame-ass answers, I don't think I could be a top competitor in any scenario. I am happy with what I'm doing.
It's interesting because I think that there's this misconception that being a pro player in and of itself gives you all of those same things. I think that a commentator or any of those, like, you're in front of the camera, you're famous, you're all those things, but there's a competitive piece missing. I've watched because I'm a traditional sports guy. I grew up watching basketball, football, etc. And you watch these guys make the transition into the desk or whatever, and you can see sometimes their want to get out there and like smack someone in the head because they're doing it wrong, quote unquote. In other words, what they could have done better. My favorite is one guy's like Reggie Miller. Anyone knows Reggie Miller? He's a famous all-time great three-point shooter. Man, Reggie would trash talk the guys shooting threes about how much better he thinks he could still do it after being out of the game 3-4 years. And it was always like it was always good fun, but there was a little edge to his voice.
Yeah.
He wasn't quite joking. He really believed that. And at
exactly.
that top level, you have to believe it, right? You have to. I think it's a certain type of personality, right?
Yes, but anyone that is a competitor, like those highs are unmatched by what I do. Like when I get back from BlizzCon and it's just this momentously positive, awesome weekend. I'm never stressed that weekend. Not really. I'm hanging out with friends.
Right.
I'm performing in front of a big audience. Like, all of that's incredible and feels good. But in my life, I have tasted greatness. Just like every stereotypical American, I was in the state championship high school football game, and I made a big backfield tackle running down their eventually professional NFL quality running back in the backfield, slamming him down in front of 10,000 plus people, and them all exploding at the same time. I've been in the booth to do a gigantic comeback, obviously off of the back of Dark Templar, and had, again, several thousand people jump up and cheer. That feeling, that moment in time, is, I hope, on some level, if this is what you care about, everyone gets to experience it, because it is unparalleled. It is unmatched. There's
Yeah.
no question about it. And pro gamers who probably spend most of their time stressed, worried, overworked, and obviously it's not all bad. There's perks. They're fucking playing video games for a living. They live life. Like, some are very successful. There are fangirls and boys. Like, it's an awesome experience. It really is cool. But uh, most of their existence is very stressed and very difficult. But that moment in time where you're celebrating, or people are just exploding in excitement, is, I've never felt anything like it. Let's just say that. There's nothing like that.
I'm gonna tell a story I don't think I've ever told before on air. So
Good.
this is one of those parallels because you're gonna tell a football story. Believe it or not, all 130 pounds of me used to play high school football. So
Sure.
I come from backwater nowhere. That's what you strive to do, to be the best at football. And I was never going to be the best, but I was one of those people that refused to believe that was a possibility, that I still could be the best. So I'd go lift weights 7 days a week. I would practice harder than everybody around me, and I still weighed 122 pounds in high school. And then we were not a throwing team, we were a running team. So I played wide receiver and cornerback. And if you don't know what those positions are, if they don't throw the ball, you literally run 5 yards and run back every single play. So finally, when the coach asked one day, we need someone to sub in at linebacker, I said, me. Now, linebackers usually weigh about 120 pounds more than I do, and I didn't care. I was going to do it, so I did that. And then one day the coach said, I need someone to sub in at fullback. Fullbacks are usually 150 pounds bigger than me. I said, I'll do that. And before you know it, my junior year of high school, I was the backup, never playing a game, of course, as in a game that meant anything, but the backup in practice, fullback and linebacker.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a long time, and I loved it. I worked real hard. Well, there was this great moment in a game. It was homecoming. It was like a movie, right? It was like homecoming.
Of
We're
course.
up by 30 points at halftime. We're crushing this other team because they always schedule a bad team for homecoming, so you win. And it's like fourth quarter, and the coach is putting certain people in. And so I get my turns in the field, but you don't get to do a whole lot. Well, the coach knew it was my senior year. He gives me the ball, right? And
Nice.
this moment, like, people were chanting the names in the stands. It was my Rudy moment. I get the ball, I run in, I get pummeled. I make a negative 1 yard run. I have 15 guys tackle on top of me, but I jumped out of that pile like I just scored the winning touchdown. It's just this feeling of I had gotten to that point where I deserved that. The chance to,
Yeah.
to, to be in a game and do that. And so my point was, everyone has their different levels of that. Where you get to feel that great success. And now I came back. God, that was over 20 years ago for me. I'm 36. Just 3 or 4 weeks ago, we're at the major qualifiers where we weren't supposed to be. We only got to be there out of a bit of bad luck for
Yeah.
another team,
I saw
and
that.
we were
Someone's
standing
supposed to
there.
get a tattoo, right?
Yeah, yeah, there's prospective tattoos coming, but if we get out of groups, I should say when we get out of groups at the major, but I'm standing there and I see the moment. We're up 14-3 or something like that, or Vex. We're absolutely dominating them, and I'm like, oh my God, we're really gonna make the major. Like, it just hit me, and my manager comes running out of the back and he just looks at me, make eye contact, and we know there's 2 rounds left, but you just can't help the feeling. And the second they finish that 16th round, I dove. If you watch the VOD, you'll catch this. Not everyone has. I jumped on the stage with such excitement that I fell off the back of the platform and almost took the entire wall down. If the CEVO admin hadn't caught me on stream, you would have seen the wall cave in behind. It would have landed on the practice computers. But it was that moment you talk about, we all long for, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, it had built up over the last year, and I lost it, and it was so emotional. I went and called my wife, and you lose it a little bit on the phone. Like, we've done all this to this epic moment in the career, the span of our company. So
Yeah.
it's really cool. We've said a lot of negative things. It's cool at the end to say, man, there's nothing like that. There's no feeling in the world like that moment.
Yeah, and I like what you said too. There are different scales. Like, I'm very fortunate and awesome and lucky to say that it's in front of gigantic audiences. But that's not to say that that's the only way to achieve that feeling. I think that's really important, because even someone in the chat said some. You said 99% of people won't experience those feelings, and that, I think that might be. I don't know that that's necessarily true. Obviously, again, it's really cool to have the story of it being in front of much larger audiences. But I think what we're driving at is competition, and putting so much into something and having it pay off in some way is such a huge release. Like, we're
Oh yeah.
biologically engineered to feel euphoric when something like that happens. We are supposed to be a productive race of creatures. And if we're not producing, if we're not contributing, we feel bad. So it's built into us, and I think competition really does that because the just under the purview of competition means that you have worked hard for something, you are competing against other people in some way, shape, or form that have also worked hard, and you have achieved, and it's
Yeah.
awesome.
There's my favorite kind of little piece off of that is you're talking about the high level of that. Most people don't know that when you check mark something off a list, it actually triggers a chemical reaction in you. That's why it feels good to make a
Yeah.
list and cross things off or check mark them off. It's actually a physical reaction,
Oh yeah.
and so that's the most minute level of this bigger thing we're talking about, right? That's the ultimate check mark off. I win the championship, or whatever. So it is kind of cool that we've set ourselves up biologically for this thing to work for us in a very positive sense. So, and in a very negative sense too. When you're on the other side, that's why it does feel so bad, right? So,
For sure.
okay, let's as we're nearing the end, I want to ask a couple of kind of questions. I think people will that are very specific to where you've come in your career. Where do you think StarCraft and RTS in general fits in the esports landscape and its growth? I know you wrote a piece for Splyce a few months back about this very
Uh-huh.
topic. Obviously, just in the last 3 months, we've seen a lot of interesting changes with the WCS announcements,
Hmm.
changes they've made. How do you kind of feel with your global view of RTS, of StarCraft, and where we're going?
I think RTS is always going to be one of the. It's a genre that a lot of people have a connection to. Their dad played an RTS, their big brother played, their whatever. Like it's in the family. It's been around for a long time, and some of the biggest games in gaming history thus far have been RTSs: Command and Conquer, StarCraft, Warcraft. These are gigantic, big games. So I think there's this cool, not necessarily nostalgic, but certainly just a connection between a lot of gamers in that genre. But I think in terms of like the big viewership, the big explosive like news shattering game release, I think the genre is going to. If I had to be so bold, I would say it's never going to happen. Like maybe a Warcraft 4 will come out, but that's also in part because it's a Blizzard launch, not because it's an RTS. It'll have you can make a successful RTS, that's for sure. But if you're like, I need a game that's going to replace League of Legends or it's going to blow CS:GO out of the water, it's not going to be an RTS. That's just the way it is. Is it because it's a worse game or harder to watch? No, none of those things. It's just that it doesn't appeal to as many people in this day and age as other genres that are more easily accessible. So if you're okay with that, if you're comfortable with that, then you could be very happy, and I am very happy. StarCraft coincided with Twitch's skyrocketing, like coming onto the scene in 2010, and I'm super proud of that. We were definitely the most watched, biggest game in the world at that time, and I have some incredible memories and experiences because of that. Because I was fortunate enough to be around it for that moment in time. But I do not begrudge other games. I do not feel bad. I don't. There's a lot of negative feelings for some people because of the ascension of other games and the stagnation of StarCraft in terms of viewership and excitement on the global scene. And I don't have those feelings. I think this is a natural place of order. We just had IEM Katowice where, um, unhosted and at a very subprime time, roughly 85,000 people were on stream to watch a less than stellar Final Four. And that's actually a very healthy number. That's
That's
fantastic.
a
It's
very
not
healthy number.
Absolutely. It's not a quarter of a million that were watching CS:GO. It's not a million that's watching LOL, whatever. But it's good enough as
It's
far as I'm
beating
concerned.
Hearthstone, it's beating
Sure.
Smash, like or at least it's up there with their bigger tournaments, and that's what you can ask for, right?
Yep.
So,
That's all you should be able to ask. If you're asking for more, then you're hoping for a miracle. So it's in an okay enough place. And then as far as the future of StarCraft goes, I think it's at its. This is the best StarCraft 2 we've yet to see. We have a really professional, great broadcasting scene. We still have a stable professional scene. So I think you can reliably expect several, 5, 10 more.
uh-oh. Did we lose Jeff? We lost our Skype call. Folks, hold on a second while we get this back. Hopefully that's just Jeff's internet, and it'll kick back in a second here. I'm still with you, and I believe, Jeff, are you back?
Yeah, I never could not hear you.
Oh, I hope maybe the stream heard everything you said, and it
No,
was just me on my end. So.
it was definitely on my end though. Like there was a hiccup, but it's just weird because I could constantly still hear you. You're like, "Oh no, we lost you," and I'm like, okay, I guess."
But I think you make a very valid point about StarCraft, and I think not. I like to look at it like this: look at traditional sports. Not every sport has to be American football, right? Golf
Right.
has its place, tennis has its place. Hell, you go to even smaller echelons. There's a lot of really unique niche games that are good for the Olympics or they're good for whatever, and they don't have to be big. Does pole vaulting ever have to be big to be still a reasonable sport? Absolutely not. It is what it is, right? I think what's interesting as somebody who's a World of Warcraft big fan, that's how I got into esports. That is the most inaccessible game, right? Like if you are not heavily into that game, it is really hard to watch. So that's always been one of the
Sure.
challenges of growing that scene. And as someone who I don't play Warcraft anymore, and I don't play StarCraft anymore, and I played a lot of both of them, I find that I'll turn on a StarCraft broadcast and have so much more enjoyment now versus when I did Warcraft. I've played like a whopping 3 or 4 hours of any StarCraft 2. I haven't even got through the not expansion, the first set, and yet there's all these units and stuff I don't understand. I've never played. I still follow it really well. I can catch on pretty quick. Warcraft, I turn it on, and there's almost nothing that different. There's a few different spells, and I'm lost most of the time. I watch health bars at the side, right? So,
Sure.
in the grand scheme of things, it still sits in a really good spot as far as that goes. I don't think it's as simple as like you said, as long as you're not expecting to be League of Legends and hit a million, 2 million concurrents, I think we're in a good spot.
Yeah, that's just my message to people. Like, look, I'm going to be gone every single weekend of May. Like I
Yeah.
already have, like there's a healthy scene. Like if you're just a person who likes to watch top level StarCraft, you have a tournament every other weekend. Who cares about the viewership? You're happy. If you're a
Yep.
player, there are teams that are less likely to sign you in this day and age, but also look at the new WCS where we do have your pucks, your neebs traveling to Poland and Europe in playing top level StarCraft. So like it's there's stuff to be happy about, and that's why I always just kind of preach the message of like focus on that and be happy about that, because if you want to be upset about the decline of StarCraft, you can absolutely just do that. That's fine, but I just think that's a waste of time.
Yep. There's, and I will tell you, Jeff, I get this question when I talk to like people in traditional sports, like if they're, they're working for a major franchise or something like that, and they're looking at esports, they'll ask that exact question. What happens when a game gets old? What happens if a new game comes out? How do you manage that? And
Yeah.
I'm honest with them. I'm like, it's not an easy question as a team owner, right? You see all these people picking up Overwatch teams. I think Cloud9 just picked up one the other day. You see people picking up Rocket League teams. You see people
Uh-huh.
picking up any new game that looks like it might have a touch of that. But not everything's going to be an esport. That's okay. Even a new RTS might not be an esport, and that's okay, right?
Right.
I think that the end of the day, we're all esports fans, and we're going to find something that fits our fancy. At some point, every one of the games we see today, in my opinion, is going to be gone, right? Like that's just a fact of life, unless they
Yep.
figure out some great way to extend it, make it look great, and unlikely. It's not going to have the life of baseball.
At least in this iteration, they all will. It's a
Exactly.
guarantee. They're all going to die.
Exactly. But the good thing is, we like what esports is, and we're going to keep finding new games. I had no idea what League of Legends was 2 years ago. I am a massive League of Legends fan now. I watch a ton of it. That's okay.
Yeah.
And there'll be another game that will happen with too. So, um, I like to always make sure we give a piece of advice. What would you say is the single best piece, or maybe one you can think of? It's not the best, but a one that stands out for you that you've gotten throughout your career or that you'd like to share.
Oh, geez.
You've probably gotten oodles of them, so maybe you can pick out one you think will be useful.
I guess I mean, in a moment. So the honest to God answer, and you could probably find half of this on a fortune cookie somewhere, but like, fight as hard as you possibly can to do what you love for a living, like, and hold on to that. I'm only 30 years old, so I don't pretend to be some wizened old monk in a hill or something like that. But
Ancient
I
for
can just
esports, right?
well, in esports, I'm as old as they get. I've been here for 18 years or so.
Yep.
15, I guess, making money doing it. But
Right.
anyways, um, for the most part, there's a lot of people that settle and they just do something that pays the bills, and it's kind of what their degree got them in school. And I know that eventually there's going to be something that gives, be it your happiness, be it you go back to school 10 years, 15 years down the road, whatever. There will be a breaking point. Um, on some level. Like the stories of people that just that grind themselves out and just go to work, and that's what they do for their entire existence are either bad ones or they're old ones for the most part. There's just so much opportunity out there. It's really hard, and there are of course stories of people that perhaps are listening to this from their jail cell where they're like, "Fuck you, Jeff." Like it's not possible at all, actually. And it's like, okay, like that's of course true, but I have seen the world. I've met amazing people. I have really loving and supportive people in my community. My wife works in gaming, where we both are just engaged and excited, and just the interaction we get with other people is just so incredible. I know this feeling. I know the potential for what it's like to do exactly what you want for a living, and I want people to know that it's worth fighting for. It's worth fighting tooth and nail for. So if you're in a job where you're like, hey, I can't complain. It pays the bills, and I have weekends off, so I get to do what I want. That's okay. And certainly that doesn't mean you go home and quit your job now and chase the dream and run yourself ragged into ruin. But it does mean be aware of the concept that you're worth finding a job that pays you to do what you want to do. They do exist. They are out there. Do everything you can to get them.
I couldn't say it better. I'll actually give you a real life story of what you're talking about. It's not from esports, it's from theater, but I think it's exactly what you said. I was in my first acting class in New York City. So I'd finished school, I'd moved to New York City. You got to, same as esports, you got to continually train to stay on top of your game, always getting better. So I joined an acting class, and the very first day, he asks everyone, get up in front of the class, do a monologue, and then just talk about yourself. See how well you do speaking about something comfortable versus something uncomfortable. And this one guy gets up, and he's probably, I'd say, like mid-40s, not your typical acting class student. And he gets up, he does his monologue, and it's pretty good. And then he says, I'm not your traditional actor. I actually just started, a couple of years ago. I was in exactly the type of job you were just saying, Jeff. I didn't really particularly enjoy my job, but he said it was like one of those relationships where you're not unhappy, but you're not happy. You're just in the middle there, right? And nothing was ever going to change unless something made it change. Well, I was fortunate enough to lose my job, and that's how he described it. He's like, I got fired because they were downsizing and just was no position available. And it made me assess of like, whoa, this is not what I want to be doing. And it isn't for everybody, right? It's a very risky thing. He's in New York City. He's in his mid-40s. He's behind people who maybe have been doing it for 20 years, etc. But it's what he wanted to do. And he dove in head first, and he made that a thing he could do. And I was just like, I looked at this guy, and I was so impressed with him for being able to do that for his life. And hey, it's not right for everybody. Like I said, if you feel that burning passion is a thing, I think that's what he felt when he finally was triggered enough to look inside himself. He needed to do that, and he went and did it. But even at 45, right? So it isn't just for 15-year-old boys, as we always get to tell people. Esports isn't 15-year-old pimply boys in their basement playing sweaty video games, right? Not anymore.
No, that stereotype's antiquated. For sure.
So incredible. Although I love to point out that I'm sitting in my basement right now talking about video games, so I get to be the stereotype.
Oh yeah, that's a whole different discussion we should have. But
stereotypes exist for a reason.
Oh, they're based in truth for Pete's sakes. I think the only thing you can do wrong with a stereotype is decide that it is the only way to deem someone their reality. Like if you look at someone like, well, based off of stereotypes, I already know what you are potentially going to do and say.
Right.
That's wrong. But if you say, based off of stereotypes, I have an idea of what you probably could do, and I'm willing to be proven wrong. I think that's just, it happens subconsciously whether you're aware of it or not. Like I said, huge tangent.
Yeah. So before we take our last couple questions, I like to do what I call the shameless plug section, because it shouldn't be called anything else. Do you want to give any plugs out there?
Thank you so much for having me on. I been speaking of awesome opportunities and doing what you love. I actually really enjoy writing, and I enjoy having kind of a soapbox, so to speak, to kind of talk about stuff I care about, and you guys provide that. So big shout out to you guys, and thank you for that. And just for anyone that checks this out, as always, just you can follow me on the various different things. But
it's on the screen. His social media's up there. You'll see.
Yeah, but for the most part, just I do. Every time this subject comes up, I spend a lot of time telling people that it's very improbable that you'll ever get a job in esports. I don't do that because of any kind of selfish desire or because I want you to feel bad. I do it because I think it's the best advice someone can give you. But at the same time, I also very strongly and firmly believe that if you get past that message and think to your, like I said, you're like, no, this is what I want to do, and you're in a position in your life where you can make sacrifices and fight for that kind of thing, do it. You know, it's like I said, this has been this has been the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, and it's awesome.
And I think we have the perfect closing question, so I'll let you think about it while I get my plug here. Someone wants an old-time funny story from back in the day. Can you think of one that you can share while I plug here? Um,
Sure.
if you don't know Splyce, guys, check out splice.gg. Jeff is one of our writers there. He writes StarCraft content a couple times a month. But we also have people like Thorin, Lurpus. We have some really good new writers coming up in League of Legends this week. Chris Cluey, who's a former NFL punter who looks at the sports side of things for esports. A lot of really big, really fantastic names. Recently, we added in Red Eye, the host, of many, many
Wow.
events. We added on Chan Man, who's an old StarCraft and now a Hearthstone guy. So we're really beefing up those the ranks to try and hit every game coverage. We also have listings of all broadcasts you could ever want to watch, and knowing when it goes live with push notifications to your desktop, to your phone, and then of course our pro team. Check them out, and we're hopefully doing some great things that are making you guys into be great fans of Splyce Pro. So to round things out here, it's your opportunity, Jeff, to share with the world a fun story from back in the day from your many, many years.
Sure. So I think it was 2009. One of the cool opportunities I had based off of gaming was I was asked to attend as a VIP the Spike TV Video Game Awards,
Awesome.
and I got to meet a lot of awesome celebrities. It was I stayed at the what is it called, Monterey Bay Casino in Vegas. Maybe not Monterey Bay. Anyways, the one that's got an aquarium in it. Mandalay Bay. Mandalay Bay. There we go.
Oh
Not
yeah, yeah,
Monterey.
yeah. Sure.
Awesome, awesome stuff. This is back when I was a college student, so just I was broke as a joke, and the idea of being flown somewhere and given swag and sitting around with celebrities was incredible. In the green room there was all kinds of celebrities. There's Tia Tequila or whatever her name was. There's Mila Kunis. There
Oh
was
snap.
there's all kinds, but actually I met a guy who I thought was Hugh Hefner, but he turned out to be some guy named Stan Lee, and he was
Oh my
one of
God.
he was one of the most polite. Like he stood up, looked me in the eye, and shook my hand when I introduced myself because I just couldn't be in a room with Stan Lee and not fucking meet him
Of
and talk to him.
course.
And we spoke for like 35, 40 minutes. He apologized for the Spider-Man series, even though I didn't be like, hey, apologize to me for this. He's just like, hey, I just want you to know, I'm sorry about the Spider-Man movies. I was
That's
like,
amazing.
yeah, it was really funny. But he said, make sure and check out this movie that's coming out called Iron Man. He said, I think it's going to be really good. And obviously, he was pretty
Wow.
right about that. But the really funny, so we had a few drinks, and sitting on the couch was one Quentin Rampage Jackson, a UFC fighter who at the time was either defending or fighting for the heavyweight belt. He's at least had it before, but I think that was around that time. And again, I had a few drinks, and I was just kind of like, you know what? I obviously I have to say something to him. He's an impressive human being. I was a bigger UFC fan than I am now. I watched a bunch of it, so I knew exactly who he was. So I walked over to him, and he had a drink too, and he's just sitting there. He looked kind of he looked a little bit bored. He didn't really know anybody. Wasn't saying anything. And I said, "Excuse me." I said, "Please make sure you don't drink too many of those, because I don't want to have to kick your ass tonight."
Oh my
And
God, you did not.
I did. He looked at me. He looked at me, and he had this gigantic, thick golden chain around his neck, as he was wont to do. And he looked at me and he said, "Motherfucker, I would knock you out in 3 seconds flat." And
Oh
I
my
said,
God.
"No." I said, I think I would give myself a solid 7 seconds. I think I would last about 7 seconds." And he said, "That's what your girl told me last night." And I fancy myself a pretty witty, quick person, and as the story goes, you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Without skipping a beat, I said, "That's a really weird thing for your sister to say," and he started laughing. It was either he laughed or he killed me, so he chose to laugh, I guess. And there was no conversation after that. We just kind of had a little laugh, we cheers, and I walked off. And that's my story of Quentin Rampage Jackson.
That's fantastic. And now, of course, he's the one that's in esports, right? Didn't he sign with Archon or something like that? I heard something about him signing with Team Archon to be a streamer. So he plays PlayStation. Unless I'm thinking he's the
Oh, he streams for sure. I
yeah.
just don't know if he's signed or I
Yeah,
don't
he
even
signed
know.
with Team Archon because they've been signing like talent as like not specifically esports all the time. So here we are. How many years later? This was 2007, you said?
9,
Nine,
so
so
7 years.
7 years ago, and now he's
Yeah,
signed to a pro team. He's now your equivalent. He's a pro gamer.
there you go.
Well, again, thanks Jeff for being on. Everyone, please check out Splyce.gg. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook. Check out our pro team. Check out our listings. Make sure you follow Jeff so you can see when he writes an article. He writes some really great content covering the RTS scene, covering what's going on in esports. Until next week, give us a follow. We'll be back same time next week. New guest, talking more about esports. Take care, everyone.